Some clarifications, however. I don't want to seem like an ungrateful brat, Because the truth of the matter is, I don't really blame my professor in that, the way I see things when it comes to the education system is very much so a product of coming out of the K through 12 system. I mean, why isn't a certain book in the school library, is a question that you start to end up asking when you're in there, and you start to realize that it's because of all the parents and all the other families that want books censored and don't want them to be in the school library in the first place, and have had their voices heard and their protest at the PTA meetings and everything, able to censor books and get them, off the bookshelves so that these dangerous ideas don't reach our children and don't influence them in their thinking. And when I find myself pondering, why things are the way that they are, I start to encounter a lot of that, you know. So trying to make it out like my professor failed me. I mean, my professor existed, at a community college, which is kind of a dysfunctional setting, you know, if you think about it, and it being based around the Prussian system and everything, as well, in the same manner that all the other systems are, but like it's the Prussian model, but with a little bit of a twist in that, you can register for the classes that you want at this point. You can pick, the courses that you actually want to take so long as you're willing to pay for them, you know? And that's the difference between, the Prussian, but that is really the only difference. And in every other regard, except for the bell no longer holding sway between classes, you don't have a work bell telling you to go from station to station. You just kind of have to abide by the clock as you go from classroom to classroom, and that's really what it's like over there. But other than that, it's still the factory floor model of things, because everything's based on the calendar. They're moving us through like we're a product and everything. And here I've been sorted, and assumed to be, not as bright as I think I am and see myself as being, and not as much of a hard worker as I have truly actually been, because I just wasn't able to get, to meet the threshold of that math course and everything, that Math 65 and everything. I mean, I certainly placed into the course. I just drowned in it, and here I am struggling, putting in the work. I mean, I doubt this will be visible when I open it up, but this was a clumsy attempt. Doing you can't even see the writing on the page. That sucks. I mean, I tried to do a number graph to do the inverse functions because I wanted to be able to see it visually, in order to plot, onto the graphs that I made and everything, and do that to find the inverse function on that study. But then I realized, talking to Ken Migo, the domain of the original equation just gets reassigned to so you flip it basically so that, right. So basically what it is that, they just taught us the domain of, the domain of the graph, or the line that's being drawn on the graph. So you get its domain, you measure that, and then you just assign that to the inverse, range. And then you take the range from the original, and you assign that to the domain. So they just get flipped around in the other order. And then you've got the inverse in the equation. And once that understanding clicked into place, it was like, Eureka! I finally understood it. And I mean, I'm working hard for these understandings at this point. It's not as if I was a disengaged student. I was trying. He had us taking photos of our homework with our phones and submitting it to him. And the thing, I was submitting work. I was working. I was coming home doing the homework. It wasn't like I was slacking off at all. I was coming home and actually doing my homework and everything, and being a good little cog in their wheel and machine, and actually participating for pretty much the first time in my life, because I usually haven't. I went to school, and I knew that back in high school I didn't really apply myself, and so I was trying to be different this time, and I was actually doing the homework and, doing all that other stuff. Especially because people told me it's a little bit different than high school, and that you're gonna have to do the homework. You know, you're gonna have to, because that's where you're gonna do most of your learning. It's not gonna actually take place in class and everything inside the system, and that's what they want over there at the colleges and everything, to see that people will go that far. Well, I will go that far. I don't know that I can go that far in 11 weeks when the pressure valve is already on. You know what I'm saying? I mean, like, I don't know. Maybe I will get through this in that period of time. Who knows? I mean, already there's only 12 units here, so getting through this much of it, almost being through Unit 1 when it's only been a couple of days, is kind of a breakneck pace as far as my own self study. But here we are. I now understand range and domain, and those concepts, and how to do the inverse equations and everything towards them, and you know if I ever need to look them up, they're in my chat, history. I just have to remember that I did this in 2026, and I can look them up, and the bot will have me, and have the formulas in it already. And I'm realizing that I contributed a Celsius to Fahrenheit converter in C to GitHub, but now I've got the formula because of ChatGPT. Not because of ChatGPT, because of Khan Academy, that I can use to try to use my C skills to reverse, the Celsius to Fahrenheit, that I wrote, all that time ago, and turned it into a, the other way around. And plus I'd like to add features like the ability, to make it truly scientific and useful for scientists, is to add Kelvin equations too. So I'd love those. I'd love to expand my little program out to, and if you want the GitHub projects, it's up there on GitHub, and it's designed to be even better than like Google's automatic conversions. It's faster. It's faster at doing these equations, and this is strange. Got it. So more. There we go. I gotta look at the code, because now it's... Right. So here we go. Please enter a valid temperature. We did use a little bit more enhanced security in this. We have a custom float H input, which changes the way float operations work, as a custom library that I put forward that is a little bit better at, handling things. And if you want to look at that library, and you want to know what makes it safer than normal C operations. Too many characters. Max input is, there's a max input, max digits, so people can't enter too many digits. They can't enter, it sanitizes the input. If they put it in a string, it will tell them that there's no float found in it, and that what they've put in, as doesn't look like it's a float, and everything, and it deals with that, and it looks for people attempting to enter invalid inputs, basically, because in C, one of the potential dangers is that people will try to input, they'll try to put in input things that basically the programmer didn't anticipate, so that to cause unexpected behavior to happen. If you don't give C the input that it's looking for sometimes, or the programmer hasn't anticipated something, it can end up crashing the program, or worse, lead to, buffer overflow exploits, and so in order to do the study from the K&R book, I made a few, edits from the K&R book when I did this one. So this one's a little bit more, this one's a lot more secure than the original one and everything. So that, because it uses my library, which is totally different than the normal float library. We replaced that, because it actually anticipates these things, and that's what makes it more secure, is that it anticipates the person trying to, input something that, not supposed to be in there and everything, not an input that you don't want them to enter into it. So it does have error handling in it, so that, if they try to put something in there that doesn't belong, it's just going to error out on them. It's sanitizing those inputs is basically what it does. So knowledge of programming, now I just have to try to input the equation in the opposite direction and invert it in this little, converting thing and everything, and to see what I have to do to, to just change the first thing that I'd have to do to edit this is basically say that to enter the temperature, the first thing I would have to do is change the puts to tell the user to specify, to specify which one they wanted converted between, and then have it do the reversed functions. So this is a little bit of thoughts about how to modify this code and everything. I'm thinking about it now. That I've got that from Khan Academy. Thinking about changing it to reverse in the other direction, and then, finding the formula for actually converting between the two to Kelvin. Oh, that's not good. My face over them. So anyways, here's the bit of code. Right, and over here I would have to change this to, puts enter temperature, specify. What I would do is I would say, specify 1, 2, or 3, basically for your input. Is this in temperature in Fahrenheit? Is it in Celsius, or is it in Kelvin? And then once they'd specified that, I'd have to have it again specify what they wanted it converted to. Over here on the float side of the equation, I'd have to add in Kelvin, to expand out that in that direction, and then I would have to say, I would have to use get float from studio input, which is totally different, than normal ways to take input, input from users. And, so anyways, as you can see, float input /h as a custom library, and, what it does is that it essentially makes sure that, a person isn't able to, it sanitizes the input, essentially, that you're not supposed to be able to do things like buffer overflow on this sort of thing. It sets a maximum digits and everything. It anticipates that. And then if you enter like too many pieces of, too much input, it'll error out and say max input is the number of characters and everything, not enabling you to put too much input in, in order to try to cause a buffer overflow. And, if you try to enter your, you try to enter in something that isn't a float, it'll error out. It handles that. And if you try to enter something that doesn't look like a float, it will also enter that in as well. So it's expecting a float, and if you don't give it that and everything, and then it frees up the input buffer, so it's not letting you fuck around with the program. It doesn't let you do that. Basically, it sanitizes your input so that it doesn't, you can't just fuck it. You can't just fuck around with it to cause a buffer overflow. It's, you've been anticipated. You're part of the programmer's concerns with it. So I've got a secure float library that is essentially put forward to try to offer some mitigations against buffer overflows with floating point operations. But I'm thinking about expanding it outward with the stuff that I'm learning in this math class.